welcome back to the Engineered Angler. This is part 2 of building that multi-part swim bait. Last week we started off with this drawing. We worked out our dimensions and where we're going to put our joints. We transferred the drawing to the wood we're going to use, cut it out on the bandsaw, then shaped it on the belt sander until we got a shape that matched the original drawing. We cut in the fins and shaped them up. And then, as a final touch, we did a little bit of carving, just the gill plates, and I was pretty happy with the way they came out. Then it was time to separate the segments, pull apart the halves, and then reassemble it all again on a piece of tape so I could hold it to paint it. Got it outside for a quick primer paint job, and it was ready for today. But I had forgotten a critical step. I need to weigh these lure parts so I can figure out what the volume of each part is using the density of the camphor wood I used. And I already did that calculation. But that's critical. This lure is going to be very difficult to weigh and balance. And this is where really the technique I use to figure out the weight long before the lure is assembled enough to actually tank test it. Because with this lure, it's going to be almost impossible to add weight after the fact. So I have to know exactly what needs to go into it while I can still open it and put weight inside it. From the beginning, my intention was to have this lure be a slow sinking lure, but I'm gonna have to compromise because it's just gonna take too much weight to do that. I'm gonna have it be a suspending lure or a near suspending lure. Hopefully it'll be slightly sinking. Now in saltwater it'll be a floating lure, but in freshwater it should be just suspending, and hopefully the shape of the body will have the lure actually dive just below the surface, and maybe it'll just be slowly floating. Hopefully. So after I did some calculations, I found that about 61 grams would get the lure to sink slowly, but I opted for the suspending weight, or the near suspending, hopefully just slightly sinking weight of 58 grams. Now I know that difference doesn't seem like much, but 3 grams means one less split shot that I have to find room for inside this body. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was going to have to really handle this thing a lot to get that weight in there, because I've got to get the weight independently on each side of the body so they're not in the way of the hinge. So I've decided to go ahead and do all that now, and then we'll paint. And doing this will give me a little more accurate calculation of the weight of the lure, and maybe I'll be able to refine the weight down a little bit. So I'm going to use this little piece of balsa as a weighing tray, and I'll zero the scale with it on there. I'm going to put all the pieces on here, and since the tail isn't made of camphor, I'll calculate the buoyancy of that separately. So that's 19.41 grams. If I divide that by the density of the camphor, which is 0.377, that really changes the numbers from when the lure was actually on the tape. So it's 51.5, and that would be cubic centimeters. That's the volume of those parts. All right, so let's go ahead and do the tail now. There's the density of 0.7 grams, and I've got 1.03 grams. Divide that by the density, and that calculates to 1.5 milliliters. So if I add that to the volume of the body, I get 53 milliliters. All right, with the lure back onto the scale, I'm going to go ahead and weigh it with all the hardware I'm going to put on it, including the twist eyes I made and the split rings and hooks. And I get 23.83 grams. So the total volume of the lure and the tail is 53 milliliters. So that's the amount of water it'll displace. And since water weighs 1 gram per milliliter, that means it has to weigh at least 53 grams for it to just suspend. But in my experience, doing these calculations, that typically is a little bit low number. I usually have to add about 5 to 6% to get an actual suspending lure. So I'm going to multiply 53 times 1.06, and that'll give me the total number with that added 6%. And that's right at 56.2. So I'm going to call my target weight for this lure right at 56 grams. Slightly over would be better. I'm just going to subtract the weight of the lure and hardware from our target weight, and we end up with 32.37 grams of weight that we need to add into the body. I'm going to try using these bullet weights. They give me what I need, and if I can split them in half, I can divide them between the two halves of the lure body. Alright, I'm just using whatever grinding tool I can fit in the hole that I need to make, grinding it back, and the idea is to have it sit completely flush with the half of the lure. This way it's not going to get in the way of the hinge. And I'm going to do the same thing for all the other parts, and I'll spare you the tedium, and I'll get back to you when we're ready to glue these weights in. All right, that should be the last one. I'll just glue that in, and all these are already done. All right, we're finally back to where we started. The lure's back on the tape, and I've decided to go ahead and go with this lure holder for painting because I think it's going to make it just a little easier. But before we get to painting, let's go ahead and tackle our question of the week. And this is our new tradition of answering a single question posed by a viewer in the comments, and this is something I intend to do on every video. So the question is actually kind of a combination of questions that people have asked that usually are two-part. One, how do I deal with these kind of calculations to get the weight on the lure for salt water? And how do I deal with really cold water or really warm water? Let's do the salt water first. The solution to that is actually pretty simple. And in fact, I keep the numbers here on my dry erase board. These are the specific gravity of water, fresh water and salt water. The only difference is 0.026. And so when you're doing your calculation for the weight of your lure, the first thing you do, like I did, is to weigh the lure after it's been carved and shaped. And then you take that weight and divide it by the density of the wood you're using. That gives you the volume of the lure. And since the weight of fresh water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter or milliliter, then it's a 1-to-1 ratio. If your lure is 50 cubic centimeters, then it'll have to weigh 50 grams to be just suspending. But if you're making it for salt water, it's not a 1-to-1. You'll have to multiply your 50 cubic centimeters by 1.026, which ends up at 51.3 grams. So it's like a 2.5% difference, but it can make a difference in your lure if you're trying to get a really accurate suspending lure. Now, the effect of water temperature on your lure buoyancy is going to have much less of an effect. In fact, so little that I don't even pay attention to it. The difference in water density between just above freezing and around 100 degrees is less than about 4% change. And I'm talking Celsius. So realistic water temperatures are going to be somewhere between just above 0 and maybe 30 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees or so Fahrenheit. And the difference in density in that band is really so small, it's not going to make a difference that you're ever going to notice in the way the lure behaves. So focus on the accuracy of your weight measurements, how well you weigh your lure, and on the accuracy of how well you calculate the density of the wood. That's much more important than whether it's salt or whether it's hot or cold. All right, let's start painting. All right, so I'm just going to start off with the broad background colors. So I'm going to start by laying down a base coat of pearl silver. All right, I'm going to start off with this Ghost Tint Golden Yellow. It's a transparent, kind of a deep yellow. Now I'm going to switch to a more orangey yellow. I just want to make the belly underneath the head a nice deep orange. All right, the next thing I want to do is put a little bit of transparent violet on there. This is a violet that tends more towards the red side than the blue side. Now I'm going to use some pearlescent blue for the mouth parts and just the underside of the gill plates. And I'm using this transparent bright green by Createx. All right, well, that's a rainbow of colors. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of hard coats of polyacrylic to seal it, and then we'll see what the next step is. So here's what I'm going to do. A little bit drastic, but I'm going to go ahead and pull all these off now that I can touch them, and then devise some way to hold on to them while I clear coat each individual half. It's going to be a lot more time, but I think I have to do it. Otherwise, I don't think I'll get a good seal on those inside joints. All right, I had to find every single point holder I had. And of course, we're only clear coating the painted side. All 6 pieces are in there, and I can turn the lights on. Shut it down. All right, it's been long enough. All right, looks pretty good for an intermediate little start to a clear coat. So I've got the three main parts down on the sailcloth, and I'm just finishing up, just tracing out the parts that I really need traced out and making sure there's enough distance between the parts. So I'll cut just inside the line, and I'll make little holes in each panel of this thing so that I'll have a lot more area for the glue to hold on to. I'll make those holes. All right, that's nicely lined up. I'm going to give that about 20 minutes to set up, then we'll move on to the next segment and so on. And I'll get back to you when I'm closer to being done. All right, brand new day. I had to leave last night. I had to walk away from this thing. I was making so many mistakes. I did manage to glue the first two pieces together and the tail on there. And the third piece is the one I haven't glued on yet. And when I was getting close to gluing it on, I noticed something a little ridiculous. The paint scheme on this piece is upside down. So I must have put it on that tape upside down and painted it upside down. That I'll be able to fix in the paint booth. I'll just touch up the paint and blend it in best I can. But the more critical part was that I didn't prepare these things to put the hardware in it. I can still prepare the third piece for those hook eyes, and I'm just going to groove in a groove up on a diagonal. The problem is the hook eye that goes in the head. Now I'm definitely not going to try pulling these things apart. Since I have to put this hook eye across the body like this, when I drill, I have a good chance of ruining that hinge fabric. So I'm going to have to really offset this one and make sure that the bit stays inside one of the halves. For the tie-on eye, I'm just going to drill straight in. I'm not going to worry that I'll damage the hinge fabric because I'm drilling in the direction of the load. All right, so for those of you who say I never show my mistakes, I also drilled almost through. Look at that, it just bulged the clear coat. I'll sand it and we'll cover it with paint. All right, I'm just gluing up the backside on this one. I try to get it so the fabric gets saturated. The idea is to put enough on there to saturate the fabric, but not so much that it'll ooze out. So it's a bit tedious. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and let that set for about 30 minutes. And then I'll glue in the hook eyes with the same two-part epoxy. I won't spend too much time showing you that. All right, well, I've got it fully assembled. I've gone ahead and filled all the little seam lines with UV resin, set that, gave it a light sanding. And I have to say this build has been a bit of a challenge and my mistakes have made it even harder. And this upside down paint job on the tail got to be the most embarrassing of them all. Let's get painting on this thing. First thing I'm going to do is fix this upside down paint job. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of metallic. Just getting the green on the top, and I think we've recovered to a non-upside down paint scheme on the tail. Alright, so this thing is one disaster after another. I was moving it to this holder and I dropped it, so now I've got a bunch of paint chips and the camera was off, so I don't even get a blooper reel on this one. Yeah, it's going to be a lot easier to handle in this holder. So I've got some scale mesh on there. I'm going to give it a light dusting with a transparent green just to give it the hint of green scales all the way through, and then we're going to work our way to darker colors. And I'm going to use this ghost tint green. It's a deep green, but it's so transparent it takes a lot to actually build up the color. Alright, now I'm going to use my darkest green. This is called moss green and it's very nearly black. And I'm going to use this comb that I've cut some teeth out of. At this point I was so nervous I forgot to turn my mic back on. But most of this is self-explanatory. Now I want to put like a highlight color in here, something bright, and I want to create a little bit of sort of a random pattern by using two of these meshes on top of each other. And I'm going to use this Createx Fuchsia. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. All right, that looks pretty cool. All right, just a few spots where I want to add a little more violet just to intensify it just a little bit. Top of the head. All right, let's fill in the dark green on the top. All right, I made a little template to make a little black ear here, right where the gill plate pops out. And I want to soften the inside line here a little bit with some metallic gold. Check out, these are like hairstylist scissors, and it's got the little gap teeth in there. I think that's just thin hair or something, but it's going to make for a nice template for little fin bones. I'm going to use a little bit of metallic white. That looks pretty cool. I'm going to give it a little bit of a highlight on the tail. And the paint job is never done until there's a little bit of red on the chin. And I really like the pearlescent red. This is Wicked Colors. It's a Createx deal. And that does it. We actually got this lure to survive all my mistakes. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to hit it with a couple of coats of polyacrylic, and we'll put a clear coat on it, put the hooks on. And considering my track record with this thing, I'm really curious to see if it's going to sink or float too much or sink too fast or end up upside down. Let me know in the comments if you guys think I've overcomplicated this. Did I overthink it? And then you forgot the eyes. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and let it turn, close it up, turn the lights on, and then I'm going to walk away. I'm going to let it just turn in there with the lights on all night. And tomorrow, I'll be sure it's nice and set and we can put it in the water. Alright, brand new day. This thing has been going all night long, and hopefully I slept off all the bad luck. And we're going to find something good in here. No disasters, it didn't fall out. Bug got in it. I haven't had a bug get in my resin in probably a year. That looks really good. I gotta say, as much as I screwed up on the paint and dropped it and everything, got spatter on it and everything, I think this is one of the more realistic bluegill patterns I've ever painted. Now, I'm gonna use these Mustad Ultra Points. They're number 2s, but they're super short shank. So while the hooks have a nice reach to them, they don't dangle down too deep. All right, let's throw it in the tank. And just as a reminder, I intended this lure from the beginning to be a sinking lure. But my first mistake, amongst a lot of mistakes, was to choose camphor as my wood. It's just a little too light a wood. I should have gone with cherry or something that dense. But at every turn as I was adding weight, I tried to add a little more weight. I used a slightly larger egg weight in the middle portion. I added larger split rings. Everything I could do, every little trick I could think of to make it a little heavier, I did. So hopefully I'll end up with something that'll at least slowly sink, but we'll see. Can't believe it. So I would consider that a little faster than slow sinking. Almost a medium sinking lure. So let's go ahead and weigh this thing, and we'll compare the weight to the original calculation for a sinking lure, which was 61 grams. And we'll do the same trick with a piece of board, and let's see what it comes out. So check it out, 61.93. We're on Lake Santa Fe. It's a bit breezy. It's windy out in the main lake, so I found this little tiny corner. Hopefully we'll be able to see through the water how this thing actually works. All right, let's just take a look. Look at that, even on a slow retrieve. Even with a really slow retrieve, it's got a nice movement all the way back to the tail. Nice. Really happy. Wow, that just looks so good. That continuous hinge just gives it like a really supple movement. Let's see if we can get it to blow out. Let me get it out there a little bit. And we'll cast as fast, we'll reel it in as fast as I can. Nah, it swims perfect. Really stable. Wow. Beautiful. I'm super stoked. I can't believe it. This thing was slated for the trash bin about 3 times. Just looks great in the sunshine. That tail just has this little springy action. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it sure works. Well, my GoPro died, so I'm not going to try doing any fishing because I won't get any footage. I gotta say, this thing really exceeded my expectations. It actually sinks exactly how I wanted it to. The action is perfect, and I really like the look. I think it's super realistic. But I think that it's so complicated to put in a continuous hinge that the only way you can do it is to make a lure that you make a mold of and then cast that hinge right into your lure. Alright guys, let me know what you thought of this one. Let me know if you have experience making these kinds of continuous hinge lures. And as always, do me a solid and give me a thumbs up. And if this stuff is fun to watch, subscribe. Alright, I'll see you guys on the next one.